Welcome back, guys, to my music tutorial. So last episode it was a bit of a lengthy chat, but we talked about music theory, and we're going to continue for a little bit longer. I think I'm only going to do one more episode on this though, because I explained most of the concepts I wanted to last time. This one actually might be a little bit awkward because I must admit this is probably one of the bits where I'm still the weakest and I still need to learn the most. But I'm going to be creating a melody from this chord progression. This chord progression we made last episode. If you want to know how we kind of got to this, you can go and watch that. So yeah, I'll just play this in case you skip last episode but you don't want to watch it. So there it is. Now, what we need is, well, as I said, a melody. So first of all, to kind of make it so that we don't have just two pianos and it's hard to distinguish the melody from the chords, let's change this instrument. We'll go into more detail about sound design and all that later, but for now, this isn't how we would usually do it, but if you go into packs and instruments, orchestral, you have a selection of choir, brass, strings, and woodwind. So I'm just going to make these strings for now. Pardon me. And you don't have to do anything with this, just close it. That's essentially the plugin that's going to make the sound, but because this is basically kind of like a preset. This is like an already made sound that we just dropped and dragged in. So that doesn't really work. It's not super important that we get this to work because this isn't necessarily going to be permanent anyway, but okay, I would try and make it so that this sustains a little less, so essentially I'll get into more detail about this later, but I would quickly try and make it just so it sounds a bit better, so that when it holds the note, it holds it at a slightly lower volume, and that when you first press it, it's louder. I would do that, but to be completely honest, this synth direct wave is one of the few that I haven't really used much, like at all. I haven't really given it a chance in FL Studio. I don't really understand it at all because I haven't really tried that hard to understand it yet. So I don't know how I could, get it to do that, because I don't see a simple ADSR, and if you don't know what that is, don't worry, I will explain it later. It's not important right now, so it won't be explained in this episode. Anyway, so now that we got that, we're going to add our piano back in, and we're going to have this be our melody. Now, I'm not going to lie, I don't have too many tips for melody. A lot of them, it's kind of, it only makes sense once you've already made it, and then you're like, oh yeah, of course that works, because I've done it that way. It's kind of weird that way. So I think, although I understand this is kind of a bit of a weird way to do it, especially live, well, not I'm live streaming this, but you know what I mean, without chords. I'm just going to try and see if I can improvise, and then once I've improvised I'll kind of explain how, once I've got something I'm happy with, why it works. But one thing that I can say is, if you want to play it safe with the melody, if you just don't want it to sound bad, then it's good to keep the notes you're using within the chords. So while this chord is playing, have your melody only use D, F, A and C, and then while this chord is playing you only use A, C, E and G. You get the point. But again, don't get too carried away with that. If you literally never use notes outside of these chords, then it can make your melody sound pretty boring. And those two things kind of contradict each other. It's just about finding a balance. That's why it's kind of one of those things that I find is a little bit harder to give advice on. But I'll see what I can come up with. Just a moment. I should make the choir quieter. This louder, and I'll probably make this lower pitched as well. That should make it easier for the high pitched thing to stand out. Sounds a little bit weird, but I'll just deal with that for now. I'll put it really low. So let's see if I can kind of improvise something. Yeah, I might go with something like that. So, as you can see, we've mostly stuck to the rule here. At this point, within this bar, the chords are always going to be D, F, A, C. And as you can see, the only time we use a note that isn't that is this one G here, which is only played for a short amount of time, so it sounds like it fits. So, a little bit of an explanation of what I'm doing here is, besides just sticking with the notes and just trying things out, is this kind of rhythm that I've gone through for here. I went for this because one thing that I've honestly taken an embarrassingly long time to realise is the importance of repetition, which sounds so kind of weird at first. Like, you'd think, well, what? Like, why would I care about... Why would I want my music to be repetitive? Unless, you know, you don't have much care about it and you just want some kind of poppy, ear candy kind of music. Why would I want my music to be repetitive? But it is actually very important, as I've learned the hard way, because I feel like one of the reasons why my melodies have been very weak in the past is because I've been so averse to the idea of repetition. It's just something that, you know, I very much like it to be very varied, but I think I get a bit too ambitious. Now, there's no reason that your music can't be both repetitive but varied. And you may be thinking, what? Wait, what? What are you on about? Those are literally two contradicting things. But what I mean by that is, you could have a tune, like a melody, that is very repetitive, but you could have multiple variations on that melody. You could have quite a lot of them, and by having a very repetitive and easily recognizable melody, but then adding lots of variations onto that melody once the listener's familiar with it, that's a good way of creating an effective melody. Because the thing is, when you actually repeat things a lot, it should get annoying, but depending on the kind of music, it can actually make it feel very emotional. In a way, you can kind of think of the melody as a person, quote unquote, and it's kind of like you listen to it more, you spend more time with them, you become more invested in it. I know it sounds very sappy when I put it like that, but I mean, it is kind of how it is. So the idea here is, of course, we're doing the DA, 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 over and over, and then there's this little like variation at the end. But that doesn't sound annoying, or at least it hopefully doesn't to you, because of how thingy. Well, first of all, we don't repeat it too much, but also it kind of works with the chords, you know, and all that. So anyway, and as well as that, it sounds very pleasant because it's the what I mentioned earlier about perfect fifths and all that. Because A is the fifth note in the scale and D is the first note, which means that these both have an exact ratio of like the ratio of this frequency. This frequency to this frequency is exactly 3:2, which means that it's much easier on the ears and it's easier to kind of rationalize it as 2 of these is 3 of these in like the oscillations and frequencies. So yeah. And then this is also kind of a nice rhythm for something like this, because the chords that we got already are kind of for an uplifting dance track by the sounds of things. So we want something that has an interesting kind of rhythm to it. Well, not even necessarily interesting, just a nice rhythm to it, even if it's kind of shallow. And this first little motif, of course, there's not much room for it to be very complicated. So, you know, this quarter beat, half beat rhythm, repeating that is an interesting way of going about it because it sounds nice, it's nice and repetitive, but it doesn't actually quite perfectly fit the 4/4 time signature we have. As you can see, this finishes a quarter of a beat too late for it to fit in the lines, which means that we can have an interesting rhythm by how we kind of have two parts to this bar, one where it's repeating this, and the second part where we're ending it off. And the ending it off part can in turn have a kind of unique rhythm. If this was just if this rhythm we had here perfectly fit into these this half a bar, and this ending part perfectly fit into this half a bar, that basically meant that this G would probably be a half note long, and these would probably also, basically all the notes would be the same length, and that kind of ruins the sense of rhythm because it's too basic, it's not interesting at all. So yeah, even though I've not written much there, that's a surprising amount you can take from that. Obviously, I'm making myself sound like I'm really smart or something, but honestly, this is something where, as I say, it makes sense as soon as you've already written it. You're like, oh yeah, of course, that's why I did it. But to be honest, trying to start from nothing, you probably won't be able to think of that no matter how hard you try, or even if you are very clever with music, unless you're very, very clever with music. You know, you kind of need to get started, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, of course, I'm going to do it this way. That makes a lot of sense. So yeah, then from there, obviously, as I said, it's not a crime to have this be repetitive. So although I don't think we're going to do the same for every single bar, for this bar, we're probably going to just see what will happen if we do the exact same as here, except instead of D, we use A sharp, which is the root note for the 7th chord that is here. So let's go A sharp to F. And this will probably sound almost right, but not quite right. And then that's where we'll come in with the whole variation aspect of it. Yeah, that doesn't sound quite right. One of the reasons for that might be the fact that this E note here, while this does fit the scale that we're using, because we're in a different part of the scale here, as you can see, there's a 2-note gap between, if we like including the notes that aren't in the scale, there's a 2-note gap between these two, whereas here we're at a part of the scale where there's only a 1-note gap between these two notes, which means that this probably doesn't sound quite right. We can't play this D sharp note, or at least not without trying something pretty risky, because this D sharp note doesn't fit our scale. Now, you might be thinking, well, it didn't sound quite right, but surely you could make that work. You could, but that's dangerous territory. I'm not going to say don't try it, but I would say don't try it until you're confident. Essentially, what we're doing there is we're slipping into another scale while we're still playing the same piece. And if you transition smoothly and subtly, it can actually sound very, very nice and make your music sound a lot more professional. But if you don't, it's so easy for it to sound like a train wreck. So, you know, and it's not that bad to just, you know, not do it. So, but, yeah, so actually, what scale would we be slipping into? We'd be slipping into a scale that has all the same notes as this one, but instead of E, it has D sharp. So, actually, I'm probably not going to spend too long trying to search for this because because it's probably going to be a long search. But in fact, no, I'm not even going to try. But basically, yeah, there's probably another scale out there that, in fact, there will be another scale out there that has all the same notes as this, except for that E is a D sharp, I'm sure. But we basically just slipped into that scale. But I don't even know what that scale is right now, so, you know, I'm not going to bother with that. Anyway, let's get back to the task at hand, which is, of course, getting this part to sound right. That part sounds fine. It's this part that sounds off. So, this is a little bit ambitious, but what if we move this here? This is still fitting with the chord here, because remember these are 7th chords, so this is A sharp, D, F, A. We didn't use the 7th note here, which is C, but we might use it here. So that sounds nice, but it also sounds a little bit too much like a conclusion. It sounds like it should probably be one of the last parts of it, or maybe the end of this first bar, this first set of 4 beats, and then we'll have a real end at the other one. But either way, it doesn't really work here. It's a bit early, so we'll probably still switch it up a bit. But that does sound better. I think I might keep that. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure why that works. I know why the kind of moving to A works, because, you know, it still fits in the scale. It's a nice kind of, ooh, it's a surprise, it's a difference, but this G's a little bit weird, but it seems to work. Ending on the F again, I was thinking that maybe F was just a good note to end on for it to sound incomplete. It is the 3rd note in this scale. In fact, maybe I should try ending on G, because G would be the 1st note in the subdominant chord for this scale. And again, with that whole subdominant to tonic, which again is the chord based off of the 1st note in the scale, that's supposed to be an imperfect cadence that sounds almost finished but not quite. That might be worth trying. Nah, it doesn't work. Yeah, no, it doesn't work. So we'll keep it at F. And then go down 1 again. AE is probably going to be a bit interesting. Now, let me just kind of check something quickly. So the reason why this sounds so good, this kind of pattern, is I mentioned here that we got the 1st note in the scale and the 5th note in the scale, so it's the perfect 5th, this to this, and it sounds nice because of the whole 3 oscillations to 2 oscillations. But here you were probably thinking, well, that's not a perfect 5th kind of harmony going on here, is it? Because this is the, 6th note in the scale, and this is the 3rd note in the scale. So why do these work? Well, if we instead pretend that even though we are in that weird D minor, except it's not D minor, it's F major technically scale, even though that's the scale we're in right now, if we were to say actually that we're in A sharp minor, then F is a perfect 5th, A sharp and F is a perfect 5th in A sharp minor, and here A and E is a perfect 5th in A minor. So although we're not in those scales, it still kind of has the whole perfect 5th thing going on. Maybe. So what we're doing here is, you can see we've broken the pattern, because this starts with the C, G, C, G, again perfect 5th thing going on there, but then suddenly it jumps to A. But it kind of works because just normally we kind of expect a break of the pattern by the 4th repetition, since it's the last repetition, but also as well as that, it kind of is reminiscent of here, because obviously A is what's used in the first one. So that's what we'll start with. And then we've still got a few more bars to do. Yeah, that fits nice and well. I must admit, one weakness that I do have with melodies, and I might have been supposed to kind of use it here, but I'm always really bad at kind of identifying this. So this is maybe something that you might be better at, is finding where to have rests in my melodies, because your melodies really don't have to fill every single space of time. Like, you know, the notes, you don't have to have every second be filled with a note. And I must admit, I'm really bad for that. I really struggle to make a melody where there's gaps, where there's nothing playing. And I know, again, that's one of those things that it sounds like that'd be lazy and a bad thing, but a lot of the time that actually can help it sound better. As well as that, when you have a melody where every single section is taken up, like there's no empty space in the melody, it kind of also makes it harder to develop that melody, because often you would develop it by filling in those empty spaces with different motifs or just sound design kind of stuff. So yeah, I might even look back on this and see if there's any notes I can erase, little bits, but yeah. Then it was 2 up, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. It's face, and then 1 up, and then A. Okay. So this might sound a bit weird, so we'll see. Doesn't sound too bad, but I might try this. I like that. Probably not a good idea. I'm just going to see how... I'm going to start doing the second part. I'm still not happy with this, but I think I might be better at judging how good the ending of that part is if I hear how it transitions into the next part. In fact, I feel like I must have mentioned this by now, but I don't think I actually have. One thing that I also would say, above all, that can really trap you out, and even if you do know this, it probably will still trap you out, but I think it's a good thing to be aware of, is that often how good a melody is basically all within the context of how much you have right now and like all the notes around it, because you'd be surprised how many times you'll be working on a melody and it will sound so bad, and then you'll just add one note that you didn't have before and it'll still be like, actually that sounds great now, that all sounds right. It's just kind of the weird way that like notes kind of relate to each other. So if you have like a very small part of a melody and you think it should be good but you're just not happy with it, then I would actually recommend considering that I would actually recommend sticking on a little bit longer and trying to add more to it and seeing if adding more to it suddenly makes it sound good, because you'd be surprised how often that happens. That's why we're adding this bit, by the way, as I say, because it's much easier to judge how good or bad this part is with the context of how it sounds when this comes after it. No, it doesn't sound right. Maybe. Maybe it is a G. Or maybe even an F. That's quite low, but... Huh, none of these sound right. That is weird. I think this might be right. I think this part's right. This was face, so try. Man, this is really nagging me. I know we tried this already, but I think this is actually what I want. It sounded a little bit too dull to me at first, but I think it's correct. Just mount. Is my laptop charging? Yeah, it is. Okay, I was kind of paranoid the screen just started going dark. I think that'll be it. I don't know why I did it. Yeah, there we go. So I think this is it. There might be a couple parts that could do with improving, but that's what we got. By the way, if you want to know how to make it so that the screen follows the play thing, just hold Shift and 0. But anyway, okay, I'm happy with that. This part is a bit weird. This part's fine. Goes a bit weird again, just a little bit, but then this sounds fine. It's these. So the only parts I'm unsatisfied with is this part especially, but in general, just the second and third bar of both of these sections are a little bit off. But I might just leave it at that for now. But yeah. So there's making a melody. Of course, as I said, this isn't the best. This probably isn't the very best guide out there, but it might be a little bit more helpful for beginners to, you know, listen to someone who doesn't exactly have a degree in music talk about it. But yeah, that's kind of my understanding of melodies so far. It should be good enough if you're more interested in the kind of sound design aspect of things, and hey, maybe this could be a springboard for you to get into the more complex melodic stuff anyway. But yeah, so next episode is where it starts to get exciting, because I actually start to talk about sound design. So I'll see you then. So hey guys, I'm back again. I've got a bit of an add-on to make to this video about melody, because I've been making one of my tracks for Avian Omens, and I came across a moment that's a perfect example of how you'll be thinking of a melody, and basically it'd be really hard to start from nothing, as I said before, but once you have something, you'll suddenly realise it makes so much sense. This is a great example of that. So I'm just going to give you a taste of this part. I'm a little bit reluctant about this, but I think I'm going to do it because I really like the idea of having this be an EP that I don't actually show anything of until I drop the trailer and then drop the full thing. But I think I've held back a decent amount, so fair enough. And again, this is just a really good example. So this is what I have so far. There's actually a bit more than this, but this is the main part I have so far. Now, we're going to focus on this part for a second. because this is the part where we actually have a discernible melody. Which, this part sounds really nice. I'm actually very proud of this. So, this part actually kind of came out of nowhere. So the chord progression that I am basically working from in this track is this chord progression in A natural minor, which uses the same notes as C major. So, yeah, it's not too difficult. It's just no sharps. So those are the notes I'm supposed to be using. And for this drop, I follow that so far. This is, it starts on an Ace chord, and it starts with, and this is A to E. And then this recorded section is 2 notes that it's just, now that I've learned to consolidate, I'm doing it a lot more often to reduce lag. If you don't know what consolidation is, I'll talk about it way later, probably. But, thingy. This thing right here is an A and a G, and the G fits in because it would be the 7th note if it was the 7th chord, but it isn't. It doesn't fit in perfectly, but it fits. And well, when I say that, I don't mean it would sound better if it was another A. I mean that technically, if we're following what the chord should be, it shouldn't have that note. But obviously, it doesn't always sound best to follow what the chords sound like exactly. So that sounds better. So that's kind of the thing here for the most part. This follows a first note in the, because what's essentially going on here is, although doesn't follow it to a T, the general structure I'm following here is that I'm following what the notes the chords play, but every odd beat within each one of these squares, so the first and the third one, I am playing the first note in the chord, and every even one I'm playing the last notes of the second and fourth one. So it would be A, E, and then it goes down to an FAC chords, and then it's FC, FC. You get the point. And it's kind of like that. And here I should have continued with that structure, but instead I did something different. So here I have an Ace chord playing at the moment, and I've got the E and the C here, and then the rest of this is just one note, except that I've copied it a scale up. So it's E, C, and this still follows the chord progression, but then I was thinking, okay, so then should I do E, G, because E is the last note of the ACE chord, and at this part, in this box, I've now moved on to the, sorry, did I say G? Anyway, at this point I've now moved on to the FAC chord, so I should follow the FAC chord. It wasn't FAC, wasn't it? I've just realised, I feel like I'm doubting myself now, was it FAC? Oh, do I know? I just look through it here. Oh no, sorry, I went one further down, it was EGB. So yeah, anyway, that's why I was getting G from. So yeah, so based on that logic, with B being the last note of that triad, I kind of made it the note here. And then after that, I kind of heard this end to it in my head, like just imagining what it should sound like. That's what it sounded like to me. That just sounded like how it should end. But then, as I was trying to find it, I was sticking to my scale, and I couldn't find it. The closest I could get was this. And that doesn't sound right. And I kept messing around until eventually I realised that here I was breaking the rules a little bit more than I would at this part in terms of following my chord structure, and it didn't even really sound like I was in the same scale. So I was actually like, hang on a minute, have I unwittingly kind of, in quotation marks, move to another scale, and essentially I had. So the reason why there's an F sharp here, even though this is A natural minor, which doesn't allow any sharps, is because at this moment in time we're not in A sharp, A natural minor anymore. We've now gone into E minor as soon as we hit this part, which makes sense because we started with an E note here, and this kind of sounds like the beginning of a completely different melody separate from the rest of the piece, even though it isn't. So the fact that E's there is kind of a giveaway, but also just the thing that confirmed it for me is obviously I went in here, minor harmonic, E. Oh, would you look at that, it fits perfectly. Now, the main reason I thought it couldn't be E minor at first is because I've only added one sharp to the scale. I'm pretty sure E minor has two sharps, and it does. It also has a D sharp. But D just so happens to be the only note in the scale I don't use in this little melody. So it's completely fine. If I play in D sharp here, it might sound a little bit weird, but because the way I've done this, I don't actually have to use the note D. That means that it stays completely ambiguous whether this is E minor or if it's G major, which is what it would be if it was all the notes except the F not being sharp and then the F being an F sharp. That's what G major is. So yeah, there's kind of an interesting little trick in a way there, and that's probably also, again, I'm not 100% sure, but that's probably also why it sounds kind of so emotional, is because it's ambiguous whether this is supposed to be minor or major. So yeah. Then I had this little bit underneath it. Originally it was, and you can do that, but I actually thought it was fine to give away that it was E minor in that context, because by this part it's already towards the end of the melody, and it also makes sense because this part where I put this little bit where the D sharp is, within this little 2-beat gap, is the only area where I use the F sharp note as well, so it still fits quite well. So if you put it together, but yeah, this essentially came out of this sound. I essentially got the idea for the rhythm for this kind of thing, because just going back again to how I even came up with this in the first place is after that sound, in my head I was hearing that it would make sense to have a little not necessarily got the pitches figured out then. I'm just using the same pitches as there because I already know it now and I can't unhear it like that. But at the time I wasn't really sure what pitches I was playing yet. I just knew I was playing this half beat, full beat, full beat, full beat, full beat, and then a long one in sync with this that would fade out. I knew that I wanted it to be low note, high note, low note, high note, low note, high note. And I wanted there to be like an emphasis on these high notes, which is what I did. It ended up being that the way this kind of fades out is that pitch slides down to fit this thing that I heard coming through once I started actually making it. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I was here. Another reason why I kind of thought I knew I wanted that like steady one beat rhythm with only a little bit of change is because the kind of starting point for this track was this weird mess of a sound here, and this is just one beat, one beat, one beat, one beat, but in a like format of first note in the chord, fifth note in the chord, third note in the chord, but that's a fifth note because of triads there. I know it's confusing, but I'll just say first note in the chord, third note in the chord. So yeah, I was doing that kind of rhythm. And this is just an arpeggiation of it. By the way, you might notice there's a lot going on here. Essentially, when I first made this sound, I was pretty unhappy with it. Later, it grew on me, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to use this. But before I got to that point, I wanted to try filtering it to make it sound better. And I actually did eventually like the filtered version, but after I messed around with the filtered version, I realised that the original version was also pretty good. I think the filtered version is better, but I thought I should use both. So this second part is what it sounds like without the filters. I think the main reason I wasn't happy with it is because I was comparing it to a sound that I already knew about. Essentially what I was going for here, although I didn't end up with it, was I was going for a bass kind of like if you've heard Wells and Megalodon Hunt to Death, the bass in the background of that drop, the wham, 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 wham. I was going for that kind of sound. But maybe a bit more pitch shifty and a bit less just kind of percussive. But it really didn't work at this tempo, and on top of that, the sound that I was making was more and more this weird mess that didn't sound as kind of quote-unquote simple as that. But eventually, you know, when I just got comfortable with the fact that it wasn't going to sound just like that, I became a lot more happy with it. But yeah, and this is just this. I'll just quickly show you what this arpeggio sounds like when you can actually hear it clearly. So yeah, hope you enjoyed both this tutorial but also this little sneak peek at one of my upcoming tracks. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.